So the legislation prevents landlords from taking rent in advance. Now, for the last 23 years, whilst I've been in the private rented sector, a standard precaution that any landlord would take when granting a tenancy is that we would collect a bond, perhaps a guarantor, and we would also ask for the first month's rent in advance. And it's absolute common sense that we never signed the tenancy or released the keys to a property until we had all of those things in place. Those were the protections that we wanted to have to hand before we would initiate a tenancy and release the keys. It's certainly practice in my office that happens. No tenant would receive the keys until all the things we need in advance are done. And critically, we must have that month's rent in advance in our bank before we do anything. The legal right to do that will be removed in this legislation. So what they're saying is the bill bans landlords from demanding rent payment before the tenancy agreement is signed. So landlords end up in this very tricky position whereby we have to sign a tenancy agreement. And by doing so, the tenant has right to occupancy of the property from the start date. So we can no longer not give possession. The tenant can then choose or not choose to pay that first month's rent. Now, let's be honest, most tenants will, but there'll sadly be some who take advantage of this and don't. So immediately it's given us a tenancy management challenge in how we award tenancies, who we award them to, and how we protect our landlords, because one of the protections that we gave our clients previously is going to be taken away. So what they do say is, ironically, they say you can still ask a tenant for the first month's rent in advance after the tenancy agreement is being signed, but before the start date. So if a tenancy was signed today, but started in 5 days' time, they can pay rent in advance in that window. But to me, it's irrelevant because the tenancy's been signed, the tenant has legal right to occupy after that date, the security has gone. So this is something we'll be re-engineering to try and give our landlord clients new securities, because this security net will be gone. So they're quite clear in the legislation that you should not have a clause in your tenancy agreement that requires a tenant to pay multiple rent months in advance. For new tenancies after the commencement date of these rules, that clause, it can't be enforced in effect. So we can only ever take 1 month's rent in advance after the tenancy started. And this is the main worry for me, is the upfront issue, which is that when we're selecting tenants, collecting rent in advance was one of the securities we used to protect our landlords and to protect my own tenancies. That has now been taken away. So we'll be building in different protections. We will have to adapt and evolve, basically. But I must be clear, if a landlord did collect, even if a tenant voluntarily paid that rent before the tenancy was signed, as a landlord, you would have breached the legislation, and as a first offence, that is a £7,000 potential civil penalty. So we're going to have to be particularly careful about when rent is paid to make sure it doesn't arrive before signing of the tenancy. That, I think, as a letting agent, we can absolutely deal with. What we will have to be exceptionally careful about is how we protect our landlords before we issue a tenancy, and that's something we will re-engineer, basically. So just to summarise, the bill bans landlords from demanding rent payments before a tenancy agreement is being signed. As I've said, my concern is this removes a major common pre-tenancy protection that we always used. To share with you one of the things that we will explore as a letting agent, we will offer our clients in future rent guarantee insurance, which we obtain through our tenant referencing partner, which is Good Lord, is the company that we happen to use. So they assist with our tenant referencing, but they have a rent guarantee product, and that would potentially help if a tenant managed to get through our referencing and the outsourced process with Good Lord. If that tenant then chose not to pay the first month's rent and never paid it, the rent guarantee product would step in and pay the rent for the landlord. Now, obviously, there is a cost the landlord will suffer, but naturally, we're looking for solutions here to replace things that we've lost. The other thing that we may well offer to tenants is bond replacement insurance, which I will come into the details of in a second. But I just wanted to make clear that this change in legislation doesn't affect upfront. It doesn't affect upfront payment of a bond. So collection of payment for the bond can still be taken before signing the tenancy, and holding deposits can still be taken before signing the tenancy. It is only the rent in advance that can't be taken. So it's quite specific in the cash that it affects. And then just to give you some details, so this is the scheme that AMRP will launch in the new year, our rent guarantee insurance product. It's delivered by a third-party company, which is the Good Lord product. So they're quoting around 3% of the rent per month to offer this product. So it's going to cost landlords around £15 per month on a £500 a month rent level. But the things it covers are quite vast. And when I come to how we have to evict tenants in future and the timeline that it might take for landlords to evict tenants in future, this is where rent guarantee could be really useful. So the things it covers, it'll cover payment of rent for up to 15 months or until your tenant is evicted. Once the tenant's evicted, they will pay 75% of the rent for up to 3 months whilst you get that property back in a state to be re-let. So that gives you a couple of months in effect to get sorted and sort your arrangements. It covers rents up to £3,500 per month. And this is a product they'll offer letting agents. Now, self-managing landlords may or may not be able to access this, but we can transfer current tenancies into that product if that tenant hasn't had any arrears for a period of time. So we have had some of our current landlords who are asking me if they've had a tenant for 3 to 5 years, say, and they might like to put that tenant onto rent guarantee insurance. That may well be possible if the tenant has managed their rent account successfully over the last 6 to 12 months, then the insurance company would probably accept this tenancy and would issue the guarantee. Usually what happens is this product is acquired when a new tenancy is initiated, so it's more common for landlords to acquire this product when they source a new tenancy in effect. So for example, as a letting agent, when we find a new tenant for a landlord, we would go through the full process. When we have a tenant we want to recommend, we go back to the landlord with the recommendation, and we would let them know at that point if the tenant has passed the full process and if they're eligible for rent guarantee. At that point, the landlord can decide. So it's usual to take this at the point of tenancy being commenced. But if you have a long-standing tenant and think you might like to be extra safe and put this insurance product on, if the tenant has maintained their rent account successfully for the last 6 to 12 months, then it's possible that this tenant could be dropping out of this product as well. And the other thing that will become increasingly important when I talk about evicting tenants later, if you have rent guarantee, the rent guarantee scheme issue all paperwork to evict your tenant if there's any issue later. They appoint a solicitor, they attend court, they manage that full process for you. Now, I know that if you have a problem tenant and you have to go to court, particularly if you need a solicitor, it's a hugely expensive process, very time consuming. So the fact the rent guarantee product will drop these benefits is particularly helpful if you had a problem tenant that you needed to deal with anyway. So this is one of the solutions that we will offer as a letting agent to our clients. So first, it will be rent guarantee. And the second product, again, that we will launch in the new year is bond replacement. So this is a product whereby the tenant can actually buy an insurance product for the landlord. So instead of paying the bond, so instead of paying 5 weeks rent as a bond, the tenant can access an insurance scheme if they're eligible. So again, it comes down to tenant referencing, and this will all be built into our process. But if the tenant is eligible, they can potentially acquire this insurance product. And what that does for the landlord, it gives them up to 8 weeks of cover instead of just the 5. So it increases the cover that the landlord would get if they have to claim at the end, but it actually costs the tenant less. So we think this might be particularly popular with tenants who are applying with us because it will reduce the cash demand upon them at the beginning of the tenancy, but it actually gives the landlord more cover if there's a problem at the end. So when I said at the beginning as a letting agent, we're going to be very busy in the early part of the new year, these are some of the things that we will be working on and offering to clients. And these are all mechanisms to try and replace protections and replace certainty that has been taken away basically by this legislation. So all of that is mainly to cover the fact that we will not be able to take rent in advance. We have to sign a tenancy, grant that to the tenant, and then fight for the first month's rent. And I say fight, most tenants will be absolutely fine, but as we all know, sadly, there are a small element of tenants who could choose to take advantage of that window of opportunity not to pay, knowing that they have to be given access to the property. So we are passionately working to find other ways to make our system as safe and secure for our landlord clients as physically possible. And for self-managed landlords who are with us this evening, I think you likewise need to be thinking about mechanisms that you can use to make your tenancies as secure as possible and to prevent bad debt before it happens in effect. This is how we'll do it. And I'm sure there's other mechanisms that landlords might want to explore. Chrissy, if I stop for a second, I can see there's a few comments there. Would you mind if there's anything I need to catch up on? It will give me a breather just to compose myself for the next section.
Yes, yeah. There are some questions, and I also have my own questions. But yeah. So the first question that came in, I think this was written before, obviously, the slide. So it just said, will all tenancy agreements have to be rewritten and signed again? Yeah, so they will change.
Good question. I think you're right. I think we answered that in that, no, they won't. There'll be this conversion document that doesn't yet exist, but I'm assured it will. So we will simply issue the conversion document.
Yeah, and the next question was, is this just for England or is this for Wales as well?
It is just for Wales have their own very unique sets of legislation. They have something called Rent Smart Wales that was in place a few years ago and has its own weird and wonderful and unique quirks. So yes, I'm speaking specifically about England. We don't manage tenancies in Wales, and I know that I know some agents actually who operate on the border, so they manage in England and Wales, and they must have absolute chaos in their offices because they're operating in two very different legal systems. So I'm specifically speaking about England. That's quite enough of a challenge. One could be
only. There was a message from somebody else saying that we had frozen and he'd lost us, but he's going to come back. So hopefully you're back. If you could, just drop a little note and let us know you're still here. Yeah. Okay. And then another question. I'm wondering if rent guarantee insurance would evolve as well to protect the landlord for non-payment for the first month.
Yes, yeah, that's interesting. The company that we use, which is they're Good Lord Group, so they have a couple of brands, but Good Lord is the main group. And their webinar this week, they did suggest exactly that. That yes, they will build something in their cover to cover that. Interestingly, of course, because this only became law on the 27th of October, the industry is quickly trying to adapt and evolve, as are we as letting agents. As much as this has been talked about for years, it has changed and adapted over the years. Things have been taken in, things have been changed and adapted. So there is slightly an element of now trying to respond to what we know is fact. Because now we at least have some certainty and now we have to plan for that. So yeah, I think it was Adrian who asked that question. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think they will offer cover for non-payment of first month, particularly because Good Lord, who offer the rent guarantee insurance, are pivotal to the rent tenant referencing. So to offer the insurance, good Lord, have to be happy with the tenant reference. It's like any insurance product. So yes, I think as long as the tenant passed and was eligible for the rent guarantee product, I absolutely agree. I think they will cover first month rent in due course.
And I've got two questions.